Hey everyone, Jake Woodfin here, your church planting missionary to San Francisco, and I want to just give you an update about what has been going on here in our ministry over the last few months. A couple weeks ago, a man in our church walked up to me after the sermon and he said, I hear a lot about this planting seeds of the gospel and watering them and seeing the fruit. But he said, before you can ever plant that first seed, you have to do the hard work of tilling up the ground. Something hit me in that moment as I began to went on to actually pray about that, is the fact that God's purpose for our ministry here in San Francisco, a lot of it looks like doing the hard work of tilling up the ground. Many of the people that come to our church or through one of our big days or show up to an outreach that we have, most of those people have people that have never set foot in a church service before, most of whom who have never heard of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so that means we're communicating these things to them about Jesus and his salvation for the very first time. Now, I know it was like this for me and most of us, that we don't get saved the very first time that we hear about the gospel. Most of us, it takes many, many times, sometimes years, sometimes decades before we finally make the decision for Christ. And I realized one thing, a lot of times people will come to our church for the very first time ever being in church, hearing the gospel for the very first time, but we don't see a lot return. And it's not because we're not trying to follow up with them or they had a bad experience. It's just because they're hearing it the very first time, right? It'd be like if you went to a museum for the first time ever and you're like, oh, this was cool, but you're not likely to go back to that museum every weekend, right? And that's the experience that many of them have. They're hearing it for the first time. And so we try to follow up with them. We try to be kind and try to continue to witness with them. But a lot of times that fruit is very hard won. And so a lot of times it just means that we have to do that hard work of tilling of the ground, and which honestly, it can be a little depressing at times. When you do a lot of work and see a lot of efforts and not see a lot of fruit. But if we can just be faithful to God and tilling up the ground, who knows how seeds will come on, someone else might come along and plant more seeds, water those seeds, and God give his increase in his due time. Maybe that's you. Maybe you have been constantly at work with your coworkers, sharing the gospel, being the light and being the salt at your workplace, and you haven't seen a lot of fruit from that. Or maybe even with your family or in your neighborhood, you've kind of fostered community, invited neighbors over for a meal, trying to get the gospel to them, and you haven't seen a lot of fruit. Just remember to stay faithful in the tilling. We might just be one link in a long chain that God is putting together to reach someone for him. And so that's what we're doing here in San Francisco. And it might be years before some people come to know Christ, but we're just trying to be faithful in tilling up the ground. Over the last couple months, we've done a lot of tilling. And so just kind of run down a lot of the outreaches that we've done. We started off with a coffee cart, which is a ministry that we kind of go down to a closed off road where there's bikers and runners and walkers and families. We serve free coffee, tea, and offer to pray with people as well as sharing our church with people. It was a really cool opportunity to do that. We had some people in our church that had never done anything like that before, and they came to volunteer that day, which was amazing. We followed that up with something called our Green Fest. Green Fest is kind of like a street kind of party or kind of a vendor fair. And so we set up a tent there. And we became one of the vendors. We were able to connect with over 200 different people, sharing about our church, inviting them to Easter and making those connections, which was really cool. And then we followed that up with a baptism celebration. So we do our celebrations huge. Most people, like I said, haven't been to church, so they've never really experienced a baptism. So those that get baptized, they're willing to invite their friends and family, and people are curious and they show up. On our baptism celebration, we had a young couple that didn't come from a church background. They got saved and they were baptized. We also had a teenage boy that got baptized. And between the three of them, they invited over 30 guests that showed up to our Sunday service. After the baptism, we went back. We had a big fellowship, and those that got baptized shared their testimonies with their friends and families that showed up. It was just an amazing, amazing opportunity just to share the gospel and have those seeds planted. And then we followed that up with a kids art outreach where we invite kids and their parents to join this art class that we put on, and just to show them the love of Jesus, tell them about our church, and connect with more families. We had 40 people show up for that, which was awesome. And then we followed that up with our Resurrection Sunday, which was amazing. We had over 70 people in attendance. Many of our first-time guests that day were people that had never been to church before in their lives. First time hearing about Jesus. And then we also did this thing this past month, and we're going to do it through the rest of the year, called our table groups. Our table groups is every 6th week, we cancel our midweek Bible study, and instead what we do is we encourage our people to meet with their friends, coworkers, family members, people that are far from God, and to have a meal with them, to share a meal with them so that they can intentionally have good conversations that turn into God conversations that will turn into gospel conversations. And from those meetings that happen, we had multiple families in our church participate in that. And several of those people that they did those, what we call table groups with, they actually came to our Easter service. And so it was super encouraging for our people, but also for me to see that intentional sharing of the gospel actually works. It's something that showing the love of Christ can actually make a difference in people's lives. And so we've been busy tilling. And a lot of times, again, it could be depressing because you're just working hard at tilling the ground. You may not see a lot of fruit right away, but I'm reminded of a story of a lady in our church named Catherine. For 2 years in a row during the COVID years, when we couldn't really do anything here in San Francisco, we started to do Easter eggs at home. We'd fill these bags with Easter eggs, and we'd give them out to anyone in our community that wanted them. For 2 years in a row, Catherine came, got the bags, say hello, and then would go away. And she never attended a Bible study, never attended when we even launched the church and started the church. But finally, one day, she walked into our services. She reminded me that she had done the Easter eggs at home before, and she finally realized how much she needed God in her life. She had been saved when she was young, but had been out of church for many years. So she became a member of our church, which was amazing. She now leads our Connect Crew ministry and is a coordinator for that. And then her 2 sons were also baptized in our church. And so sometimes the tilling of the ground can get tedious, it can become hard, you don't see a lot of fruit. But you know what? You never know how God is going to use us and how God is going to give the increase in His timing. So keep tilling, and we will too. Please continue to pray for us in our ministry here in San Francisco. You know we want to be missionaries here to start multiple churches and continue the work of tilling up the ground and planting those seeds and watering the seeds of the gospel to see people come to know Jesus. We are still kind of dealing with the loss of about a third or over a third now, about 30 different people that left our church over the last 6 months, just moving out of the city. Nothing negative or wrong, just moving away. And so still trying to retrain leaders and get more volunteers. And so just pray for us as we're dealing with that still. And just pray for us to continue to be faithful. I want to say thank you so much. As I always say, thank you so much for your faithfulness in praying and supporting us. We could not do this ministry here in San Francisco without you. So thank you so much for helping us till this hard soil here in the city.